because once our students learn to paddle, the equipment, all we have is available to them. Kids borrow boats for a week or for months or for a season, and that's what we want them to be able to do.
With so many users of the river, it's hard for everyone to agree on its management. Changes in the release prescription have been praised by some and resented by others.
People are disappointed that it's only one day this year. I've learned that that's because of the fisheries, that they've changed the mandates.
I wish that they would go back to running the river 2 days like they used to. Now they just do one day. They don't schedule the river. So it's the Army Corps engineers that run it, and they just dump the river till they're down, and that's it. They don't schedule it. I don't know how they used to schedule it, but they used to run it 2 days. They would either shut it off and start it back up Sunday. Now they start dumping on this Saturday every year, and they go until it's down. So, I mean, it could be up in the morning. You might catch a run or two. Maybe not, you know, you don't know. So.
There's been traditionally in recent years 2 whitewater releases a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. And the Corps, in cooperation with Vermont Agency of Natural Resources, which the Fish and Wildlife Department is part of, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, have worked together on developing a plan that allows the whitewater releases to continue, but minimizes the environmental impact of that. The timing of the releases is when the Corps is lowering their pools anyway. In the spring to provide a lowered pool for smolt passage, and in the fall to reduce their pool for the winter, which they need to do for operational reasons. So with natural ramping rates and other changes, minimum flows overnight, the environmental impacts of the releases now are minimized because of those changes and because they're lowering the pool anyway. In order to do more releases, the water has to come from somewhere, and that comes from shutting down the river. And in the past, that's what was done.
There'd be, within a few hours, they'd ramp up the water to high flow, about 1,500 CFA, which is what it is right now. And then at the end of the day, they'd pretty much just shut it off to save up enough water for the next day. So that rapid increase and decrease is something that the fish just aren't used to. So either they get stranded when the water is lowered really fast, or when it's ramped up really fast, they get kind of flushed downstream and get displaced.
Ecologically, only in the case where the river has sufficient flow in the fall should there be a release. To deny the lower river an adequate flow of water damages the aquatic ecosystem and the species that rely on that adequate flow. If it were a dry fall and they were pooling water, I would be very concerned, and I would be advocating for no fall release. And I believe that is the arrangement that has been made with the Agency of Natural Resources, that only at adequate flows will there be a fall release.
It's tough where you have the fish people who are really interested in the fish and the habitat and want to do everything for the fish and want to keep the flows as normal as possible. And then you have the avid paddlers and your recreation people that want more releases, and you know, it's kind of hard to do both. So you kind of got to compromise there somewhere in the middle and try to treat everybody so the paddlers get a good time and we don't raise too much problem with the habitat for the fish.
I think over the last couple of years the crowd has almost gone down a little bit, which I know there's been some talk about them saying that they may not do the shuttle service depending on the turnout. Shuttle service, you can run the river 4 or 5 times, even 6 times, depending if the water drops. When everyone comes in the spring, generally people run the river one shot because they don't want to hike the dam again, so it is a hike. I think part of what makes it so fun is that you only get to run it twice a year, so it's not something that you're on all the time. If I could run it all the time, I would probably run it more. There's a lot of play spots.
The USGS gauge at Jamaica and the Corps flow and reservoir level information are both available on the internet. And if boaters look at those, they often can find times when flows are comparable to the releases naturally and come out and take advantage of that. And we encourage people to do that because that provides recreation without the environmental impacts of the storage and release of a whitewater release.
At center stage in this fight over the river's flow are the aquatic species themselves. The West River harbors a wealth of biodiversity. Some creatures are easily seen, while others may require a closer look.
This is a caddisfly, and caddisflies are the larval phase of a winged insect, and they build their own cases. And there are hundreds of different kinds of caddisflies, and they build all different kinds of cases depending on where they live. And this one has just built a fine tube out of sand particles. These creatures that we're finding now are the larvae and the nymphs of these adult caddisflies, stoneflies, mayflies. And they spend the bulk of their lives in the water, feeding in the water, providing food for larger organisms and each other. And then they pupate and then hatch out themselves at various times over the summer and into the fall, depending on when they were laid. Here we have a couple of caddisfly adults, newly hatched from their pupal cases. Wow, and see there's some of the old-timer fishermen call them wing-ups. Well, here we have a stream salamander, and this little creature lives right along the edge of the stream, hunting various aquatic insects. You can see its gills. Its gills are right above its front legs. They look like little feathers, fur sticking out either side of its head, and they live their entire life in the stream. If you swim in this river, come with your child to the same place you've always gone swimming, and just say we're going to catch stuff. And kids like to catch stuff. Then they get looking, and they can't believe how much life is in the river that they've waded in or river that they've played in. They never knew there was so much going on, and there's a lot going on. So that's a very fun thing to turn kids on to, the abundance of life in our local rivers. Adults get psyched about them too. I think it's the surprise of it. They look at the river and they say, oh, a lot of rocks. And then we invite them to look a little more closely, to pick up the rocks, turn the rocks over, and then just start right now, for example. Immediately there's movement on the underside of rocks. Immediately there's life.
My title is Zoologist, and mostly the animal groups that I work with are aquatic. I work with fish, aquatic invertebrates such as the mussels, also terrestrial invertebrates, as well as amphibians. I'm out here today to look for the brook floater, which is a threatened species in Vermont, species of mussel. In Vermont anyway, it's only found in the West River, as far as we know. Because of its precarious situation here, and there are several risks that it faces, it is listed as threatened under our endangered species law. Doing a mussel survey is challenging because the mussels are on the bottom, of course, and you have to get down below the surface to be able to see well. So that's done in a couple of ways. One is to use what I call a viewing bucket or a viewing scope, which in this case I've constructed out of a trash can. But I cut the bottom out of it and I put in a piece of custom cut plexiglass and glue that into place, put it back together, and there's a hole at the top so I can put that on the surface of the water, look through the top, and see the substrate on a nice sunny day. These are a couple of species that occur in the West River. The three on top are shells of the brook floater. I often find empty shells out in the stream, individuals that have died for one reason or another. But this gives you kind of an idea of the size that these reach and how they start out very small. This one, as small as it is compared to the adult, is probably 4 years old, if not older. And we can sometimes make kind of an estimate counting the rings on the shell, which is not completely accurate, but it does give us some indication of age. The older ones, when they get to this size, these could be 15, 20 years old, possibly even older than that when they died. And this is another species that occurs here. It's related to the brook floater, but it's called the triangle floater. You notice it has a bit of a different shape. It has a rounded triangular shape. Now, most people would never notice them because they spend most of their time on the bottom, even buried in the rocks or in the mud. And in some of the better spots, you may have over 200 mussels in one general area. They don't seem to be as numerous as they were 10 years ago. The numbers that I'm coming up with are a bit lower than what they were finding in 91, 92, 93. Of course, there's land use practices that are potential issues sediment coming in from various places. Development is always a challenge, and people like to be as close to the river as they possibly can so that they can get a view of the river from the backyard. The brook floater is a species that's fairly sensitive to siltation. One thing about development is that it does have the risk of increasing the amount of sediments that enter a river. Proper planning can prevent that or alleviate that. Freshwater mussels, of course, are part of the natural system. I think that in itself is important, because if you start losing bits of a system, you never know what the effects are going to be, and you may not be able to get them back. But freshwater mussels are also fairly important and do serve a role other than just food for muskrats. They are good indicators of water quality. These are filter feeders, so they get all their food from the water column. And if we have problems with our water quality, this may show up with, this may cause some negative impacts on freshwater mussels. And if we start seeing reductions in freshwater mussel populations, that may indicate a problem.
For fishing, probably the most important species in the drainage is brook and brown trout. There's wild brook trout in most of the headwater streams in the drainage. There's wild brown trout, which often get to large sizes in the medium and larger streams. And we also supplement that by stocking catchable size brook trout and brown trout in certain places in the drainage. When you get below Townsend Dam, the water's warmer, there's fewer trout. In fact, in the summer, almost no trout. But there can be good smallmouth bass fishing, and in some years there's good walleye and even American shad fishing. The retreat meadows is right at the mouth of the West River, and that's almost like an estuary type habitat, and it's got a variety of warm water fish species. Largemouth bass, northern pike in particular, yellow perch, black crappie, white perch. So it provides a real diversity of fishing opportunities, particularly in the winter, but really throughout the year. Atlantic salmon were wiped out of the Connecticut River watershed in 1798, so there's been no salmon in the West River or other parts of the watershed since then, and they were gone for almost 200 years before the restoration program started. So it's been a long and difficult process to try to restore them, but we've been successful in restoring an annual run. Juvenile survival continues to be good, and we hope in the future we'll see a lot more. Below Townsend Dam, the Rock River is the major tributary, and there's smaller tributaries to the Rock that are all salmon habitat, and then there's small direct tributaries like Millbrook, Smith Brook, Grassy Brook. We also stock the West Main stem and tributaries above Townsend. Because there were no adult salmon when the restoration program started, and most of them now are taken for broodstock, we stock fry into suitable habitat, and that involves walking literally every foot of habitat, every foot of stream habitat that we stock, and this is largely accomplished with volunteers.
This is part of a year-end project studying the West River watershed, the Millbrook sub-watershed, doing a lot of field work, field testing, and seeing how this particular watershed relates to the salmon restoration effort in the Connecticut River.
Thank you all for coming to do this. We really appreciate it. We have probably close to 80,000 fish that we're stocking today, and you guys are the crew, so you'll be doing it for us, which is awesome. We're going to be stocking 4 streams: Smith Brook, which is behind us, over behind the buildings there, Grassy Brook in Brookline, Millbrook, which flows right by Leland and Gray, and we're going to end on the south branch of the Saxtons River. You're going to have a 5-gallon pail with, upwards of around 3,000 fish in your bucket. So I can't stress to you how important it is to be careful with these fish, because there's a lot invested in these fish. The number of fish in your bucket is directly related to the good quality habitat that's in that section. We've mapped all of these streams. We've done a habitat inventory, and we've physically measured the best suitable habitat for these fish, so we know exactly how many metric units of habitat there is in each section, and we're stocking at a specified density, so we know how many fish your bucket should have. The substrate and the flow, those are the critical things you're looking for. A good solid flow of water and a cobbly gravel bottom.